at the core, what was your reason for this campaign?
Oh, the reason I did this campaign, by God's grace, was not to try to teach the Canadian church something, even though I knew and I hoped it would. At the core, my reason, my why, was the burden of remaining silent became more painful than the risk of speaking up. The burden, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I knew, it's not about knowledge, but I knew too much now, especially when you begin to travel and you're out in various nations of the world and you're seeing what's working, and you're seeing, you even hear things said like, oh yeah, we know Canadians, there's things said about us even where it's like, you guys got to wake up in this area. And I began to see globally how nations, especially when you get into how nations are transformed, how really nations are transformed, or how nations are built, how evil momentum in nations is reversed. When you begin to find out these things and you become awakened, then it was like, I can't keep silent. I've seen it other places. I know what works. We as a ministry have done a number of things that have been catalysts of transformation in other countries, as you know. We're about to do it here in the Philippines. But we know what works, and I realized you don't have to wait for it. I realized, what Jesus said was so true. Do you not say there are still 4 more months and then the harvest? I tell you, the harvest is ripe right now. When you find that out, you begin to look for strategies and tools that work in the right now. When we began to discover what really works as far as the transformation of the nation, which I believe that's discipling nations, the transformation of a nation. When you find out what works, you have to be a voice of change. So it was nothing against my brothers and sisters. It was nothing against some of the stuff we've discussed. It was simply, at my core, I'm telling you the honest truth, I couldn't keep quiet. And I began to look for ways to speak this. It was coming out in our trainings. When we would do trainings throughout the country, pastors would say, wow, this is it. This will change the nation. And they were getting it. But I realized I'm going to have to go to social media. The problem was I never had time because I was always flying around doing trainings. COVID crisis hit. Now I'm on lockdown in the Philippines. How's that for irony? I'm speaking to Canada from a different country. Now I'm on lockdown and I have the time. And I begin to utilize social media as a platform to nail my thesis to the wall of the church, of the Canadian church. And now it became, I've got the time, and I feel like this is part of the great reset that's happened for our country during this crisis.
So you have written a book that was entitled Beyond the Four Walls.
Yes.
So there's a rumor coming around that you may release a book on this subject. So let me ask you this. Is this true?
Let me tell you my system. I've written 4.5 books.
Wow.
I've got 2 more at the editing stage. And I began to feel like, the more content I was putting out and the more testimonies we had, I began to see a need for a book. I don't want to give away the title, but my process would have to do with these videos being transcribed into articles. The next wave, for those of you who don't know, the next wave of the Great Canadian Reformation is going to be a wave of articles going out. And then the articles, we teach systems and processes of how to write a book. That's why many of our graduates write many books after they take the training. We will be making those into a book. Please don't steal the title if you can imagine what the title's going to be. And we're going to release the book. And I'm going to give free copies to pastors and leaders right across the nation related to the Great Canadian Reformation. And we are going to turn the tide long term in the theology that the charismatic Canadian world has until Canada becomes a leading nation in this area and we can truly be a model of healing for the other nations of the world. If you heard the rumor, you heard it's true.
Check that out soon. That will be really soon. So you have been speaking a lot on transformation on your recent interview. So would you say that this is your main calling to bring the message?
People tend to think that. They try to brand you. You know, whatever vein you're in, people seem to be more comfortable if they can label you. And so right now, of course, that's my message. Is it one of my life messages? Sure it is. And that's what we're doing in countries of the world. But I also have a message of prayer and presence. I also believe in signs and wonders. I function in signs and wonders. I love a great revival meeting. So people can tend to try to label me as now the transformation guy or next Ed Silvoso or these things people say. But in actual reality, it's the vein I'm in now. And I even almost got a little tired because with COVID crisis, now I was doing interviews all the time. And everyone wanted to ask, okay, speak on transformation. I'm going to interview, speak on transformation. Well, hold on, guys. What is transformation? Like, we've got to break this down. A lot of people, the majority of the body of Christ isn't there yet. You've got to deal with people's identity and, you know, your individual callings, how to awaken your calling, pastors, how to get people beyond the four walls of the church. There's so much to the topic of transformation. So it was funny because when that was all people were seeing and hearing from our ministry, I saw a funny dynamic. I would then post photos or videos from a revival meeting where we were just healing the sick, deaf ears open, great stuff was happening, nothing to do with transformation. I'm preaching on like angelic visitation or something. And you know, people were sort of offended. They want you to stay in your, don't touch I find a lot of Canadian charismatics are very territorial in their ministry. Like, okay, keep him over here, you do that, but don't do both. Don't touch on all these areas. But I'm a kingdom man. If it has to do with the kingdom, I'm going to preach it, I'm going to teach it, and try to live it out. And it's going to manifest itself in different venues. Don't put God in a box. Don't put me in a box.
Yeah, so at this point, I'm mixing in some questions that comes from different sources. So let's go again.
I know.
Are you ready?
You know, when we put that meme out about, you know, right, ask Pastor Derek, I knew all kinds of stuff could come in. So I'm ready. Let's do it. Here we are, guys.
Are there any revivals? So happening in Canada? Where can we go one experience revival in Canada?
Oh, great question. You know, I would say Canada is not necessarily burning with the fires of revival right now. Some of it has to do with the temperature of the climate of the Canadian church. Some of it also has to do with God trying to emphasize the other side of the coin as it relates to going beyond the four walls. So we have really idolized and looked to, okay, the country can be saved if God sends a revival. I know Catch the Fire has made a great shift into where they're going, new, fresh vision. You know, they're building their ministry and network throughout the world. So I always think of Catch the Fire Church as a church on fire. There was not the rumor, but this True North revival, which is what I think this person whoever asked is alluding to. It's Chris Mathis, Pastor Chris Mathis. I've never actually met the guy. So I don't like to say too much about it. I've never been to his church. I've never preached at his church, but there were some good things happening there. And all of a sudden it was branded, you know, the True North Revival. And so some were asking, like, you know, what's going on there? My take on that, and of course COVID kind of, when the church doors were shut, I know that really hit their church. My take on that would be that they are a church that is on fire. They are a church that is having the kind of church services that we want for all churches to have. There's some healings happening. There's great things happening. And again, I'm no expert. I haven't been there. I think the challenge for them is probably going to be how to translate what's happening in the building to outside of the building and the community. I have seen they've begun to do some things in the community. I really liked the strategy they used. When COVID hit, they couldn't all gather. So they broke down into several campuses of no more than 50 people in different parts of the city. And they advertised, hey, if you want to go somewhere, you can go to any one of these campuses. And I like the strategic thinking of that church. Would I call it a revival? I don't know. I haven't been there. But I think the challenge for them, which was the challenge for us at the embassy, I wrote the book From Revival to Societal Transformation for this reason, that you can have all kinds of amazing things happening in the building. Again, I'm not labeling them this is just generalizing. And we had that. I mean, unbelievable miracles, great services. You're kind of the hot church for a season. And you know, we had buses coming in from other churches. We had some transfer growth, you know. We called it a revival, but that eventually has a season of, most of the time, history has shown us, that comes to an end. And you might not be the hottest thing on the block anymore. Have you been able to translate what's in the building to outside the building? So we had to do that when what we had going on around 7 or 8 year mark, God just sucked the life right out of the building for the purpose of now wanting to introduce us to the other side of the coin, which was equipping laborers to go out and transform society. Now that became the emphasis. And it was both and. Revival in the building, transformation outside of the building. So that would be, I think, the next challenge for them, not knowing them. And hopefully Pastor Chris doesn't mind me saying this, but I suspect he's a man that knows when you're in the public eye, you get talked about. So I consider him to be a strategic thinker, a kingdom man. That's what was refreshing for me. When I saw some of the messages he was teaching on the kingdom, I knew it was a fresh wave for Canada. And so I really hope they're able to keep the fire burning there and go beyond the four walls of the church in a big way and be a real example to the rest of the body. It's funny because I don't mean this to sound sacrilegious, but you know, having a move of God in your church, it's almost like winning the lottery. Every church's goal is to have revival at their church. And so much so that we lose relationships. When God moves at your church and the church down on the corner, he doesn't move, and that person's jealous of you. And we've kind of in Canada made the highest goal, not necessarily the expansion of the kingdom into society, but we've made the highest goal all about revival coming to my church. And when it does, we get so excited. We're the guys where God is moving, and we brand it, we email it out, and people come and experience something. And so that's always a touchy place. I like to err more on the side of, okay, this is awesome. Let's win souls. How do we get this out there? And how do we become a resource center to help other churches step into what we're doing? And I'm sure that's the heart of Pastor Chris Mathis there and their movement. So, yeah, good example.
That's revival. So another question from online. This one's new. What is the purpose of prayer?
Ooh. What is the purpose of prayer? People tend to think that the purpose of prayer is to twist God's arm and get him to come down and do something. That, for me, is one of the most narrowest funnels and understandings of the glory that is the prayer life. Prayer is not really about getting God to come down and touch the nation or do something. Prayer is really more for you. I pray for the following reasons. Number one, I pray to spend time with God to become like him. I want to spend time with my friend. I want him to rub off on me. I want my character to be formed. I want to, You'll have no problem with Jesus results if you spend enough time with Jesus. That's the first reason I pray. Second reason I pray would be to do spiritual warfare, to deal with the demonic powers of the second heaven, the powers of the air. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, rulers, all of that. I pray to deal with those and to do spiritual acts to confront those and deal with those so that there can be an open heaven and ministry and things can happen so the kingdom can come. Jesus said, if I cast out demons by the finger of God, it means the kingdom has come. So when you pray and you dethrone the demonic and one kingdom is displaced through prayer, now another kingdom rushes in and it's the kingdom of God. It just makes life and ministry easier when you're living in the kingdom. Third reason I pray, which is the most underestimated, I don't necessarily pray for God to come and do something. I pray to see strategy. I pray to see, like it says of Jesus, why he was so successful. He only did what he heard and saw the Father doing. So he would go away and pray. He would see and hear something from that dimension. Then he would walk it out in radical obedience in this dimension. I pray to see what God would do if he was in my shoes. And then I go and do it. When you pray and you see and hear something, I got a vision, yay, and we sit down and we wait for God to do it. I dreamed a dream, or I saw something, and our prophetic default, I sit down and relax in church because God's going to do it just because I saw it. No, once you've seen it, you must go and execute as if it all depends on you. These are the three reasons I pray. Let's say number 4 is at times to perform the miraculous and to do the works of God on earth and to bless people.
Thank you so much for that.
And we have narrowed prayer to, come on, God, I prophesied 3 times, I jumped around on the stage, we brought these people together and we did this prophetic act. Prophetic acts work, but not as much as you think they do. It's more 2%. You're dependent on a miracle when you're relying on prophetic acts to do things on earth. And so we're praying as if it's God's problem, as if we have to somehow appease God to get him to, as if he doesn't want to bring revival, as if he doesn't want to touch the earth. We pray that way, rather than using the strategy God gives us to go and disciple nations. So I'm challenging people with that these days. I'm challenging people in this series with that. One God thought captured and one strategy from heaven that you go and live out can change the face of the earth.
Has the Canadian prayer movement been effective as far as changing Canada? What do you think of Art Lucier?
What do I think of Art Lucier?
Yeah.
Okay, so the Canadian, we'll start with the first one. The Canadian prayer movement, has it been effective? Number one, we don't know yet. There are aspects of prayer and that dimension that we may not see the results right away. Who knows? We might see Dr. Leslin become Prime Minister, Leslin Lewis of Canada, and it could be connected to the prayers, the Battle for Canada prayer meetings that were held. We just don't know. What I do feel the Canadian prayer movement has done very well, that you can be sure of, is they have raised awareness of social justice issues in our nation. When you gather people together in a building to pray, that's one thing everybody can come together in unity on. When you gather everybody and they fill up a building and they begin to pray, the issues are put on the screen, or the issues in the nation are brought up, and everybody begins to pray. Suddenly the church is a lot more educated in the issues out there, and they want to be a vehicle of change, even if all they know how to do is pray. And some people are just called to that. So I think that was effective. The other thing that the Canadian prayer movement has done has forged a unity among believers. We saw a coming together. I mean, if it was the days of Watchmen, the intercessory movement, the different intercessory movements that we've had, it brought together believers and relationships were formed. And relationships and networking is one of the key economies for the advancement of the kingdom on earth. There are three. One is prayer, one is finances, one is relationships. When you gather people together like that in unity, there's a blessing. We know that. The scripture says that. Will it change everything? Not so sure. At the end of the day, nations are changed by the people who push the hardest, who are the most strategic, and who show up. That's a bottom line. However, the Canadian prayer movement has probably done a lot of things we're not aware of. Second part of that question, I think, said, what do I think of art? I'm actually glad for this question because I actually really love Art Lucier. He is like, I have a high respect for him. He's I would call him an unlikely guy that is so courageous and almost a slight naivety in his courage and zeal for God and for Canada. I believe God is a respecter of people like that. You don't need a degree. There's many things you don't need, but what you do need is the courage to be obedient to God. And I see Art Lucier. He's a brilliant guy, a smart guy. I was speaking somewhere. I called him a statesman the other day. He's a brilliant guy. But what I think God reacts to, and if you want to make history, you have to be courageous and radical. And the thing, I don't know him that well. I can't speak. This is not an endorsement. I can't speak to all levels of his life. I don't know. I consider him a friend. But what I love about him, a fearless, radical zeal and faith to take a nation in the best way he knows how. It is not easy to raise that amount of money for national gatherings. It's not easy to do that many national gatherings. We just see everybody come together into a prayer meeting and guys like that make it look easy. But you don't know the battles that these guys go through to spearhead something like that. And you don't know the spiritual battles they have to win. Guys are taken out for less. The devil takes people right out for less. And Art Lucier has been trumpeting something faithfully and consistently. And on that level, I really respect him.
So you have recently launched something with someone named Sammy Robinson.
Sammy Robinson.
Yeah. So what is it about?
Oh, wow. You know what? Sammy and I only met each other, I think, once at some event. We hugged, said hi, mutual respect. And I just saw what he was doing online. I think he, saw what I was doing online. And he has literally, almost single-handedly started this wave of online evangelism. This is one of the things that the COVID crisis really brought out, was everybody began to shift in what they did. So, he was online leading people to Christ, 10 people, 20 people at a time in his online broadcasts. And so at first it's cool, some people got saved online. And then it was every broadcast he was seeing people saved. And we were all blown away by that. And we kind of felt wow, I knew the touch of God was on Sammy's life. But now I began to see a hunger for the harvest. And that's one thing that had been missing in the Canadian landscape. And this is where it might be offensive, some things I'll say here, but it's truth. You could go to 9 out of 10 churches or even Canadian conferences, Canadian charismatic events, and not only not see anybody led to Jesus, but not even a call for salvation or an emphasis placed on soul winning. It was usually just the gifts of the prophetic, gifts of the Spirit, this kind of thing. And all of that is good. But you began to feel man, where is reaching the lost? And even as we would grow our churches, it was a lot of transfer growth. And we actually, one thing my dad does that I love is he will give a call for salvation at the end of every service. He never wants to miss an opportunity. And we had a pastor, visit our church who travels to different churches in Canada, and he said, do you know how cool this is? One thing we rarely see is opportunity given for souls to be saved in our churches. And I found that hard to believe until I began to travel throughout Canada, and there really was less emphasis on soul winning. And when you get back to the Great Commission, Matthew in Matthew there as your grid, Matthew 28 as your grid, you inevitably have to begin to see people saved. And we have complicated it. We have prayed for God to do it. And suddenly, here comes Sammy Robinson online, leading people to Christ in what is supposed to be the most difficult time to do it. COVID lockdown, where we think we're not going to reach souls. I believe God is using Sammy as a sign and wonder of righteous judgment on the church, in the sense of, here in the worst of times, the harvest is still ripe. What have we been doing when our buildings are open? We have all these resources. When everything's normal, why aren't we reaching people? Now that things are not normal, here you've got a guy that is leading people to Christ. So the reason he called me was he said, Derek, I had to connect with you because I'm seeing people saved. And you got to know Sammy. He's such a breath of fresh air. He's so excited. He's saying, I'm seeing people saved on like every week, man, every week. But I got to connect them somehow. I got to connect them to churches. And those churches have to have onboarding systems to keep them and care for these new believers. And that was it right there. I saw it. And he saw it, was that the harvest was ripe. But in some ways, some Canadian churches had been out of the game so long that we forgot even how to value or take care of the harvest. Sammy's evangelism revival produced the question of, are our churches ready to take care of the harvest if there was an influx of souls? So whenever there's a problem and a question posed, it's now up to us to find the solution. So we did a live broadcast, and we came into agreement, him and I, to begin to take pastors and leaders that are serious about soul winning, taking care of the harvest, caring for them, processing them, and onboarding them into their churches. He began to platform and promote our History Makers systems training, processes training, and had me on his show. And then now we're holding a training at the end of this month for pastors and leaders who want to learn system building in Canada. We've been trying to trumpet this thing for a long time, and here comes Sammy right on the tail end of a major crisis, and he says, let's do it. And when we came together, there's the intersection again. And he's a humble enough guy to say things like, Derek, I stay in my lane. I know what I'm called to do, and here's where we need you, and here's what I do, here's what you need to do. There's that intersection again. We don't have to be doing the same thing. We don't have to run it by a committee of socialism, of whether one's allowed to do this or do that. We just do it for the sake of the harvest, and we set aside all the other stuff. And in coming together, his part and my part, when we put them together, became the ability to actually disciple pastors in how to create systems for church growth and societal impact. And it's working. So we've got this big thing at the end of the month as it relates to training them in how to onboard these new believers that are being won online. And not just like, I rededicated or something. People in tears, people, families being touched, real, genuine salvations. And here's a guy saying, I'm doing the evangelism. Where can I find a church that will value and process these new believers? And there are churches that will, and I think every church would say, yeah, we would. The issue is always we just haven't known how. Hence, this coming together of him and I, we just made it a priority. We just said, he launched this 1 million soul mandate for 2020. He said 2020 is not going to be defined by COVID. It's going to be harvest. And so when that emerged, the Lord spoke to me. True story. During this crisis, the Lord told me that he was going to speak to several leaders in Canada as it relates to an evangelism revival, an awakening again of harvest and soul winning in Canada. And I believe Sammy is one of them. I believe God spoke to me, and there are others, and God spoke to Sammy, and he is an example of what it is to start a movement, be all in, and care about the things that God cares about. I'm really proud of him. I'm privileged to be working with him.
This is going to be exciting.
Very.
So next, Another question says, what would be your top three concerns for your country today?
Top three concerns?
For Canada, currently.
I would say number one is the theology of pray and beg God with every prophetic act you know how to do to try to get God to come down and reach the harvest, or to get Him to do something He's waiting on us to do. That theology, and you see it everywhere. It's our default. Rather than reach the nation, we'll worship over the nation. We'll do prophetic worship over the nation. All of those things have their place. They're all good. But that theology has held us back, and I've seen in other countries that don't have that theology, they're changing their nations for Jesus. That would be the first one. Second one would be the overemphasis of the prophetic. The overemphasis of the prophetic to the point where that is the gospel of, that's Canadian Christianity. And I think that's dangerous. And we've even begun to see, where it's been abused. And COVID revealed a lot. Like, we didn't even see it coming. COVID just revealed a lot. So the overemphasis of the prophetic at the expense of other things that are necessary for the transformation of a nation. Just prophesying to a nation won't win the nation. And again, I always have to say, nothing against the prophetic. It's not either or, it's both and. The third one is a bit of a curveball, especially for pastors. And it's the I will build my church syndrome, where it's all about our church. This this idea that success in ministry is based on how great your church is. Or success in ministry is based on how many people attend your church. Can you imagine? We limit the great gospel of the kingdom to how many people show up to your building on a Sunday. I'm like anybody. I would want a lot of people coming to the church. Sure, we want that. But that has become the goal, and you see it. You can smell it. It's all about in-house, always, how to have this kind of sound and lights, the trendy thing. We've made it all about the Sunday morning, and it is partly about the Sunday morning. But we've lost the origin of bring the kingdom to the world, beyond the four walls. This is why I love going to small churches. Small is the new big. I've been trumpeting this all over the world. You get pastors in a room, this is the truth, at a pastor's network gathering, having coffee, and the most popular guy in the room, or the success story, is the guy with the most people in his church. And we all start saying, well, how many people do you have in your church? And if everybody came, I'd have 300. If everybody came, I would have 500. And the most successful is the guy with the most attendance. But if you really want to know what changes your country and what it takes to disciple a nation, the presence of churches on every corner has proven to not necessarily transform nations. The presence of churches doesn't transform nations. The presence of sons and daughters. You can have a mega church in society and the nation is not being discipled, because it takes sons and daughters who are discipled, who are equipped, and who are sent out beyond the four walls in an organized way to occupy territory in society. That's what immerses a culture in the kingdom of God, not just because you have a great church. So I'm seeing this, and I am not against conferences, events, strategies that help your church. We've got to take care of everything. You got to keep it all going. But when the emphasis becomes all about the church, look, Jesus said, I will build my church. So Jesus can take care of his bride, and for us, think kingdom, build the kingdom. I tell pastors all the time, it's not about how many people you can get into your church. It's about how much of the kingdom you can get out into society. Small is the new big. So the third concern I really have is I'm watching guys following trends, imitating other pastors and other churches to the point of style, clothing, everything, and they think, and my heart goes out to them, they think, if we can be like that, Sure, there are principles you can take. We learn from others. I'm like my father. I'm like my spiritual father. We learn and grow together that way. But when church growth becomes the main deal rather than building the kingdom, that's where we've missed it. And you'll get the opposite effect. You won't see growth. I learned a long time ago, if I focused on equipping whoever I had in my church and sending them into their pulpit out in society, we had no problem with church growth. Because that person out there reached people that our Sunday service couldn't reach and then brought them to the Sunday service. That's how we saw it.
Thank you so much for that. For those who didn't know, we've been making histories all over the globe.
Yes.
Yeah, we have in Asia, in Europe,
Yes.
in Africa, I believe, and every part of the world. So my question goes like this. Why do you believe that your ministry has been so effective overseas?
Overseas, great question. I think God took us first to Eastern Europe, Africa, to test my heart and to test the hearts of our ministry, the people in our ministry. I knew we had something. I knew we had something that would be revolutionary in North America. Those who've read my book, Beyond the Four Walls, they say, this is for North America. God tested our hearts in how we cared for the most needy at first. And what was interesting was I saw a dynamic where people from impoverished nations or developing nations, third world nations, they love the message of transformation because it brings into it not only Jesus as king, but we can raise our country up out of brokenness and poverty until even physically the economy, the everything begins to reflect heaven's kingdom. Plus, anyone who does societal transformation knows great church services don't change the nation. It's the principles of the kingdom of God that transform a nation. Righteousness exalts a nation. So when I go to third world countries and developing nations, it's profound. When they grab a hold of the principles of honesty, integrity, values, and then how to create systems that change the landscape of the culture and change the heart, systems that infuse godly principles into society, they run at that thing. I mean, they love it. They love church, but they love societal transformation. You know, one example in Namibia was blocking evangelistic ministries from coming into the country, saying, you guys hold these big crusades, take up big offerings, then you leave the country and you don't pay taxes. It's all miracles, signs and wonders, take the money and run. They said to our ministry, they said, we welcome History Maker Society into Namibia because you are training Namibians in how to rebuild Namibia. That is discipling nations. And here in the Philippines, you know, we're about to release something in the Philippines and do what we do in these countries that brings the result. We're going to deal with the systems of the Philippines. We're going to deal with the values in the Philippines. One thing you've got going on is you still hold to certain values that are key for a nation to prosper. The only thing you're missing out on, I would say, are the systems and organization and strategic wisdom on what it takes to build up your nation. And that's what we hope to introduce. You've got Jesus is Lord all over your jeepneys. I go into the mall parking lot and there's like, do business. There's a picture of Jesus and it's a business advertisement. I think, yeah, you guys got it. Jesus is the ultimate CEO. Then why is the country suffering poverty, corruption, all of that? There's a reason. It's not what you don't have, or it's not what you have, or the lack of, it's what you don't have. And that's what we want to help to introduce. So now, we've seen this message received by nations who really, they know they need it. They want to rebuild their nation. Canada and the US is heading to a place of needing this, and we want to prevent that and get organized and impact our culture again. So that's why the nations of the world jump on this. The other reason is a prophet struggles to be accepted in his hometown. You can be a big deal all over the world, and you come home, you're just so and so, and don't come into my Canadian charismatic territory where my ministry is. But we just want to serve churches, serve people. I don't need something from them.
Well, for us here in the Philippines and the rest, no, we are watching Canada. We're looking at Canada falling backwards morally, and it seems to be getting worse. So, is there a hope for Canada?
Is there hope for Canada? There's always hope when you're in God. There's always hope. Is there a strategy for Canada? Is the question that you want to ask me.
So, Pastor Jay, what are your plans for the Philippines?
Great question. Well, we're here. COVID has kept me here. And what we thought at first was a curse has turned out to be a great blessing. You know, we partner with Dr. Caleb Lee, a Korean missionary here for 14 years. He runs the Full Gospel Seminary, as well as the Wagner Leadership Institute. He is taking on the role of our Filipino, or our director for History Makers Academy Philippines. And we're beginning works here. Our goal, our global goal, is to establish 12,000 of our Transformation Council groups, these 7 mountain cell groups, in society. And we have plans for the Philippines. We have plans to see the raising up of small strategic groups like that. Small groups for business, Transformation Councils for business, for family, for education, for even, because we did this in Canada, even the beautifying streets and areas of Philippine society, social justice issues being targeted. We plan to raise up the nameless, faceless leaders within this culture to see, to be a catalyst of transformation throughout this society. We're going to begin in Mindanao. We're going to begin in Baguio City. And we've already got some good stuff going on. But there's a chance that I may stay in this country longer than I thought I would. Any nation I've been in or flown back and forth to for any duration of time, we begin to see transformation. Not because I'm great, but because God's grace is on this ministry. And so if I'm kept in a country long enough, some stuff starts to happen. And that's what's about to most likely, let me say I'm 99% sure that the Philippines is on the radar to establish a history makers society in the country of trained and equipped laborers who are going to turn their country upside down from the inside out. I also want to say this, and I don't care what anybody thinks about it. I am a big fan of the G12 movement here in the Philippines. The pastors and leaders that I have met, people like Pastor Mervyn Escabano, and not just because he officiated my wedding, but people like, Pastor Herbert, different ones that I've met locally, Bishop Oriel, Balano. I can't believe it. We're teaching off the same notes. That guy, I have such respect for what Bishop Oriel has done and is doing. He gets it. He gets the kingdom. The G12 movement is one of the only revivals in our generation that has ceased dying. It seems to just continue. It keeps growing. The reason is it's a discipleship model. It's a revival model. It's a kingdom model. It's all about the thing that matters most to God, which is to win people to Christ and make disciples. And they use systems. They're using systems and processes. And it's like when I saw it, I began to understand why they were fulfilling the Great Commission in going out. So you can say what you want about the leadership, and everybody's got their stream and their bias, but I have been impressed. I know this wasn't your question, but I have been impressed with the G12 vision to disciple. That's the vision Jesus gave us. And I think when it's in its simplicity like that, God really honors it. And then they don't wait for God to do it. They set up systems of consolidation, discipleship, all of this, processing new believers, and we're watching people saved who were not saved before, never been to church before. Now they're being discipled all the way to the point of them becoming leaders. So when I saw G12, I thought, yeah, that's what I'm used to. That's what our ministry does. So we as a History Maker Society, my dream, our dream, is to be able to partner with the G12 movement in Philippines, to be able to walk together. Literally, my heart posture is to get down on I'm sorry for the dramatic language, but to get down on my knees before the G12 movement and say, how can we help? Tell me what to do to help this ministry. How can we, if you need us to do a training that's just for G12 or just for Philippines and call it G12 something, I'm willing to do it. I don't care about the branding. Just how can we help further this movement in society? We are a discipleship training, transformational movement. How can we help? You can quote this. I'm in the Philippines on my knees before the G12 movement and its leadership saying, I'm stuck in your country. Let me help. I'm here to serve in all genuine humility. I don't need ministry platform. I've got enough of those. I need to see nations transformed, and I'm willing to crawl on my hands and knees in the dirt to see it happen in the Philippines.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been great.